Definitely not. There we go. Yeah, there you go. My uncle would always say to me, there is nothing that sticky tape cannot fix. In New Zealand, we say number 8 wire. Okay. Thanks. This is brilliant. An unidentified, ungendered mass protoplasm at YouTube got offended. Well, it's getting to that point, though, isn't it? But I think even that might be offensive because that seemed a bit like you were fat shaming when you used the word mass. You know, that mass, doesn't that imply a large girth? And then protoplasm sounds a bit sciencey, so that might be offensive to someone who doesn't do science. Okay, so next topic I've got 3 more topics to go. Let's see if we can. Where is my safe space? Let's see if we got. Let's see if we've got the stream up and running sufficiently to get on with the rest of the topics. Okay, so which movie has the most toxic fans? Yeah, here we go. I think I've got 2 streams running at once, believe it or not. No, here we go. I think one's finally shut down. Okay, so which movie has the most toxic fans? Wanda, I can hear you. Can you hear me? I think he's tolling us. Hello? Hello? Who's there? Is anyone there at YouTube's? I remember when my mother first got on Facebook, and God bless her soul, amazing woman. But she had a bit of a learning curve, and yeah, it was quite interesting the way she used it initially. So anyway, which movie has the most toxic fans? And I'm sure you're all thinking, well, it's probably Star Wars, isn't it? Last Jedi has toxic fans of terrible storytelling. Because that's been the accusation of late, right? that the Star Wars fan base is basically a group of toxic man babies and people who are misogynistic and hateful. Someone says, I'd have to say that Ghostbusters 2016 has the most toxic fans. Anime is where you find the toxicest of toxic fans. But believe it or not, in my experience, I don't want to dwell too much on where we think the most toxic fans might lie, but in my experience, I want to use this as a bit of a segue to talk about actually the Game of Thrones response that's been going on. But in my experience, Zootopia fans were the most toxic because I did a video about Zootopia a couple of years ago, and it was only a short little movie review, and it only got just under 2,000 views, about 1,800 views. And my reaction to Zootopia was that I thought it was a terrible movie, and my kids thought so as well. We rented Zootopia thinking it was going to be a sort of possibly a fun little kids movie, watched it with the kids, and several of the kids didn't even make it through the end of the movie. They just walked out because they got freaked out by it. And then our eldest, who's quite a voracious reader, has been, like, she read the Diary of Anne Frank when she was 9. And you know, had consumed Harry Potter and the Narnia series and all of Roald Dahl's books by that stage. And she watched it and she said, Dad, this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it was also loaded with ideology, man. There was a ton of ideological preaching in that film. So I gave what I thought was a pretty reasonable, I was honest about what I thought about the film. I wasn't nasty or anything. But man, the responses that I got on that YouTube video, and I was looking back through some of them the other day, and they were actually quite hilarious when I looked back through some of them, because my daughter made a very brief appearance in the video, and she just to give her sort of 2 seconds worth, and several of them got really toey about my daughter. You know, someone said, your daughter read Harry Potter, but she did not understand Zootopia. Either she never read Harry Potter or she doesn't understand it. So ironically, Disney as it seems has attracted a certain fan base. But yeah, my experience, Zootopia fans were way worse than any Star Wars fans I've ever dealt with. Fans of The Last Jedi, or not so much fans, but I think defenders of The Last Jedi, they are, man, they'll get real intense on you because they don't just get intense. One of the things I love about Star Wars fans and being a Star Wars fan myself is we get passionate about Star Wars. We love it. It's just such a seminal piece of storytelling and mythology, and we're passionate about it. We care about it, right? But what I found is that the defenders of The Last Jedi, they get political. They get real political. So they won't just defend the film and say, I liked this film or I enjoyed it. I don't think you're right. I loved it. They will turn around and they will say, you're wrong because you're a misogynist or a racist or a whatever it is they want to call you. Because as far as they're concerned, man, the movie was seen to be more of a political statement than anything else. But anyway, I was thinking about this the other day about toxic fan bases because obviously, and those who watch my channel regularly know that I have stopped watching Game of Thrones some seasons ago for personal moral reasons. And I don't watch it. However, obviously, there's a lot of people who do, and I move in circles and people I'm connected with, a lot of my fans who are fans of Game of Thrones. But what's interesting is the way this season is playing itself out, and I haven't watched it. I've read the synopses of the episodes and what's unfolding, and holy guacamole, the thing seems to be falling apart. And what's interesting is some of the same people who got all upset about people critiquing The Last Jedi and who are defenders of The Last Jedi are now really, really upset as fans of Game of Thrones about Game of Thrones and the subverting of expectations that's going on with that series. And they're now all upset. They're all upset at Benioff and Wise for what they've done to their beloved mythology. And I thought, isn't that interesting? All of a sudden, some of the same people, not all of them, but there is a subset of those Game of Thrones fans who are also big Last Jedi fans and defenders of it. And now they've got all political and they're doing some of the same things, which apparently you're not supposed to do if you're a movie fan. The other thing that's interesting is some of the same people who said, oh, Star Wars is just a movie about space wizards, why are you so upset about it, are now really, really, really upset about Game of Thrones and what's happening there. So the irony is certainly not lost on me. Daniel says, I see them as passionate but clearly divided. This is Star Wars he's talking about. 40-plus-year-olds see things much differently than the younger generation. Yeah, I would tend to agree, Daniel, but I don't know if it's that's consistent. I know a lot of younger people who are really frustrated by The Last Jedi. I think one of the big divides between the younger and older fan base is actually around, or certainly this has been my experience, is around the prequels. So those of us who are 40 plus, for us, the prequels were not a great outing. But if you are someone who was under the age of 40, then for you, like the prequels was just the bee's knees, right? And that's where you cut your teeth and where you introduced to Star Wars. So for a lot of people, I think that's the actual age divide. And so that's where you see that more of the division is that they really love the prequels. I've got friends of mine who are in this camp, younger friends, and they absolutely love the prequels. Think they're the best things in sliced bread, and they will not hear a bad word about them. However, when it comes to the question of The Last Jedi, they don't have a problem as well. They're also critiquing that and saying that they thought that was a terrible movie. You're not missing much. Game of Thrones became crap for a while now. The Last Jedi is good because Trump is president. Who's trying to be a provocateur? Yeah. Oh, so true. You're only considered toxic we're only considered toxic because we don't praise The Last Jedi as a masterpiece. And that's it. That's true. It became a convenient defense. And it was like, well, if you don't praise this film, then clearly you don't understand my art. Was it seemed to me was really what was driving a lot of that. I don't get why people, Mike says this, I don't get why people who didn't like new Star Wars, are accused of being fanboys. If we were fanboys, we would refuse to acknowledge the flaws of anything to do with Star Wars. That's exactly it, Mike. I made a video about that, saying that that's not how fanboys act. Fanboys don't critique. Fanboys are obsessed to the point of you serve them up a plate of beans and tell them it's steak, and they go, "This is the best steak I've ever had." And you say, "Why?" Because Star Wars gave it to me, that's why, and Star Wars is my everything. That's what a fanboy does. Fanboy doesn't go, "I'm going to critique this movie and point out the flaws in it." Well, no need to watch it with all of the angry reviews on YouTube after every episode. Well, that's it, right? Yeah, well, Old Soul says, I also appreciated the prequels. I have come to like aspects of the prequels more now. I went on a journey with the prequels. Initially I was okay with them. Then as I began to think about them more, immediately after going to see them in the movie theaters, I began to get frustrated with them. And now I have begun to appreciate aspects of them more. One thing I do appreciate is that Lucas actually tried to do something new. He actually tried to, and he grounded it very much in the world and the mythology of Star Wars. He didn't do weird stuff, and you got to give him credit for that. The execution failed, I think, but you got to give him credit. He actually showed how you could expand, and if he'd got it right, it would have been pretty impressive. But unfortunately, he didn't get it right. And when you look at something like Revenge of the Sith, you think, man, how close did they come? Because there's some great moments in that film. There's an awful moment too with the mask, when the mask goes on. No. But there were some great moments in that film, and in many ways, a lot better than anything that's come since. That's for sure. You had this perfect marriage. Lucas was involved. John Williams was doing at the top of his scoring game. But yeah, anyway. Raymond says, anytime a movie is remade decades later, it deals with the fans' nostalgia, and that really gets some passionate reactions. Yeah, you're right. And it's always a high bar to deal with, you know. How do you... But then in saying that, there are examples which show you can do this well, and you can modernize as well. Think about Batman. Everyone loved Tim Burton's... Well, I think everyone did. Tim Burton's Batman had a pretty good reputation as a Batman film. And then along came Christopher Nolan and said, hold my beer. I'll show you how we can do this. And he modernized. He did something with the franchise. People who have a nostalgic love of Tim Burton's Batman, you absolutely have this huge love for the new Nolan trilogy as well, in particular The Dark Knight. Amazing filmmaking. Daniel says, I like the prequels. George Lucas told the backstory I wanted to learn. And I think there were mistakes that were made, but I also think that this is why I'm more appreciative of the prequels now. When you watch the prequels in sequence with the original trilogy, now that you can do that, it's actually, you see the whole story. If you ever get a chance to do this, you've got a long weekend and you've got spare time and you're not going to be irresponsible by doing this, sit down and watch the films. Maybe miss out the Phantom Menace. You don't really need that. But maybe start with Attack of the Clones. Work your way through from that point right through to the end of Return of the Jedi. And what I got when I did that was I got this huge appreciation for the grand scale of this family saga of redemption. And you really get the sort of the scale of what he was trying to do. And that's one of the things that sort of brought me around to the prequels a bit more. I make experimental movies. It's okay to be toxic because Mary Sue will show you the light. John Carpenter's The Thing is a great example. Yeah, so Jedi, are you meaning that that the remake of that, or do you mean that the Thing was John Carpenter's original one was a great example? It's a trap, said there's 30 people watching and only 9 likes. Hit the like button, you left foot people. We need to get some merch made, don't we, left footers? Okay, there is a comic of the original draft of Star Wars. Doc says this. There is a comic of the original draft of Star Wars, and it's amazing how much of the concept of the prequels was already there. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And you can definitely tell that he had a vision there. I think one of the weaknesses really with Lucas with the prequels was the technology probably got the better of him. He's always been a bit of a tech wizard, right? And I think what happened was when all of this new tech was available to him, I think he just got a little bit enamored by it. And instead of using more of the old methods, the tech became too dominant, and it became more focused on the what was going on screen than the story that was happening on screen. So it was about the visuals and the imagery. And so I think that's where it sort of got let down a little bit. And I think the other thing too was that Lucas, I think he has a tendency, or certainly saw this in the prequels, he was a bit prone to inserting perhaps the political messaging of the day, or allowing that to shape some of the what was going on in the films. And I think perhaps if he'd focused more on, again, the heart of the story of who was Anakin. I had this idea for the prequels that I personally think would have been a better way to do it. And the way, all you do is go and watch the movie Chronicle. Because I think Chronicle actually gave you the template for how Anakin could have been set up in those prequels. You have an older Anakin, not a young boy, but an Anakin who comes from a dysfunctional family situation, and he's actually already displaying powerful Jedi traits, and so they have to train him, because otherwise they can't leave him untrained, because they're really worried that a guy who's come from a dysfunctional home with these powers would be an absolute disaster. So it's sort of like them trying to actually save the world from a bad outcome by training him, but then it goes badly wrong, and all of his dysfunctional past catches up with him, and he doesn't know how to deal with the powers that he's been given, and he becomes angry at the world and blames them for what's happened to him. And I thought that might have been a better way to go about it. Your average guy says, Revenge of the Sith was, for me, the best out of the prequels. Definitely agree that there are some great moments in that film. I can actually rewatch that film, unlike The Last Jedi. Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I've got a cinematic playlist on my Spotify of cinematic greats, musical score moments from different movies that I think are just great pieces of cinematic musical scoring. And Anakin's Dark Deeds is there's two other pieces from the Revenge of the Sith that have made it onto the top of that list, because they're great pieces of musical scoring, and there's something about that film that had an atmosphere. It's all missing from The Last Jedi. Visuals over story, says. Old Soul says, my biggest problem with the new trilogy is that they were too safe. A soft reboot, more or less, wasted potential and recycled stories. Yeah, I agree. And it started with, I've said this before, and there's a video I made a couple of weeks ago. It actually started with J.J. Abrams and The Force Awakens. He just plagiarized wholesale A New Hope. And I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's good enough. And I think in time, more people will come to see that. They'll realize, ironically, that actually set in motion the wheels of fate for what came next, because everyone was like, oh no, I hope they don't just rip off Empire Strikes Back next and then rip off Return of the Jedi in the third film. And I think there was such a desire not to do that we ended up with The Last Jedi, this total awful subversion of expectations. Cal says, well, we didn't know anything about who the Emperor was. Daniel says, one point of contention the fans have articulated well is the disruption of classic hero architecture. Archetypture. It's imprinted on the human consciousness, perhaps on the most primitive part of the brain. It is, absolutely is. And someone asked me before, why do I go to church? And while I'm a religious believer, why am I a religious believer? Because I actually see in mythology, good mythology, a grappling with those big truths that religion tackles. And in particular, that quest for self-giving. And I see the fact that we have a pull towards the hero archetype, and we gravitate towards it, and we instinctively know there's something good and true about this. And it's not just an evolutionary biological thing. There's something more going on there. And to me, that points to a higher truth. And for me, it's a piece of evidence that points to something higher, which is why I hold the beliefs that I do. It's one reason. It's not the only reason. You notice, It's a Trap says, you notice that there's no interesting aliens in the sequel trilogy. I can't honestly remember one new interesting alien species that has stood out, not even as side characters. Yeah, it's interesting that there's not a lot of that sort of stuff. Cal says, Anakin should have been the same age as Luke. He left to fight in the Clone Wars, and Owen stayed on the farm. They were actually related by blood. We're off to the races. Yeah. If your foundation is weak, your building will fall. The Force Awakens was terrible footing, and that's right. Greg says, no one questioned who the Emperor was because Vader was carrying the story's villain role. Yeah, and you didn't need to. Like, with Snoke, the reason you need to know about Snoke and the reason you don't need to know about the Emperor is the Emperor has a very specific role in this. And when he's introduced as the sort of the power behind the throne, or the power on the throne, if you like, and the puppet master. But we know everything we need to know about him in that original trilogy. Snoke, however, is a brand new supervillain, not just a villain, a supervillain who exists in a universe where the Emperor previously was the power behind the throne, and so or power on the throne, and so you have to start asking, where the heck has this superpowered evil villain been hiding all these years? Where did he come from? That is a reasoned, logical question to ask if you're talking about storytelling. And to sort of say, well, they didn't explain the Emperor, so we don't have to explain this guy. No. This is much further on in the timeline now, the story timeline. You do have to explain him, because where has he been? Where did he come from? Like, you need to actually answer that question. You don't need to answer it for the Emperor, because you don't need to know that information for the story they told. You don't need to know the Emperor's backstory for the story to be complete in that original trilogy. You need to know who he is and what he does, and understand his motivations, and see him in the context of that story and what he does and the role that he plays, and you see all of that. But Snoke, you do need to know who he is, because where did he come from? Where has he been? Why have we not heard about it? It would be like someone with the Lord of the Rings, and they destroy Sauron. It's all over, and then all of a sudden, there is another giant evil presence with a whopping great evil eye that's even more powerful than Sauron's, that's appeared in Middle-earth. And you'd be saying to yourself, where did that come from? And someone says, well, you don't need to know that. We kind of do, because of the story and continuity. The Last Jedi was your average guy says, The Last Jedi was a pretty close copy of The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi combined. Yeah, that's true. I can't stand when defenders of The Last Jedi say that the film was refreshing and original. It wasn't. And there's other concepts too they've stolen from other things. Speaking of Thrones, I can't think of any other franchise that capitulated over time, says Tommy. I think Thrones' problem was that they started with pre-existing material. And that pre-existing material from George R.R. Martin, who's clearly, whether you like or dislike Thrones, the guy clearly has a talent for writing. He has a gift for writing. Well, then once his material ran dry and they had to hand it over to new creators, all of a sudden the problems got exposed. The problems were hidden, I think, effectively because, you could use someone else's content. But once you had to start writing it your own, that was a different story. It doesn't bode well for Star Wars, though, does it? Now that they've announced that that these two same guys are in charge of the new trilogy, and no news on Rian Johnson and what's happening to his trilogy, but he's clearly still lurking. Good on you, Tom. Dylan's a good man. Still lurking with intent in the background there. So you'd have to say that it doesn't really bode well for what the new Star Wars trilogy is going to look like. Old Soul says, and Aragorn. Aragorn. I got told off for this recently. You're not saying it right. Aragorn is a hermit that drinks Ent sap with no explanation as to why. Blue Ent sap, it would have to be. Nigel says, how did the New Order rise when how did the New Order rise? Just when did Luke fear he had lost Ben Solo? 2 movies in and we know nothing of Rey's backstory. Yeah. Emperor Johnson is lurking in the shadows. Well, wouldn't it be funny if we ended up with Benioff and Wise as the two, directing it, and Johnson writing it? That would probably be the end of Star Wars, I think, for a while. Man, I don't know if you come back from that. The unholy trinity. Man. Here we go. Daniel says, when fans bring up the lack of continuity, they're basically attacked. Yeah, that's right. You're told you're a fool. Okay, so fake news of the week. 2 items to go. Let's move on. Fake news of the week. This is classic. Did everyone see the story about the guy in South Africa who was arrested and is facing jail time because he got free KFC for a year in South Africa by going into Kentucky Fried Chicken and claiming that he was in upper management and he was here to test the KFC chicken products and that they had to give him free chicken. Did everyone see that story? Well, it's fake news. I saw that story and I thought, I hope this is true because this would be gold, but it's not real. KFC have come out and said, nah, it's not real. What I love about this fake news story is that they even put a flourish on the story by having him, they gave him this backstory that he was a limo driver and that he would turn up in a limousine to KFC because he was a limo driver and he would get out in a nice suit and he would pretend to be from upper management and he'd get free KFC. So when I read the story, at first I saw the headline, I thought, oh, this is gold, this is epic. Someone has trolled KFC and a delicious troll of KFC. Then the more of the details I read in the story, I thought, oh, hold on a minute. I don't know if this is true because why would you go to jail for this? How would he get away with this for so long? There's just things that the old red flag started popping up all over the show. Well, then KFC have come out in the last 24 hours and said, no, it's not true. Old Soul says he's absolutely crushed. I've got a friend of mine who's an absolute KFC addict. He is a fiend for KFC. Does anyone know what line, by the way, what movie I've just stole that line from? He's a fiend for KFC. You didn't say KFC. He said he's a fiend for something else. If you can tell me, I'll give you a prize. I'll give you a big thumbs up as your prize. But anyway, a friend of mine is an absolute fiend for KFC. And I texted him earlier this morning and I said, are you in jail? Do you need a lawyer? But here's the thing that's interesting about that fake news. That news article, I don't know about how it was in where you live, but in my country, our top print journalism websites, our newspaper websites, they ran that story as a real story. They actually published it. That, to me, says a lot about the state of the media. And it's interesting how clearly no fact-checking at all. Because if you just read the story, you should have had alarm bells going off in your head saying, is this really true? Because there's things here that don't quite seem legit. But clearly, and if you're a journalist, surely this is your bread and butter. But it seems this is the state of the mainstream media now in a lot of areas. And so they published the story. And it's pretty clear now that we've got this problem because they desperately want clicks. So I'm pretty confident that in a lot of their upper management meetings, they'd be saying, you know what? It's better to get the clicks and to do a retraction than it is not to publish and not get the clicks. So just publish anyway. And it's one of the reasons why when the mainstream media complains about being attacked, people are calling us fake news, it's not fair. I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but you've really got no one to blame but yourselves because your conduct. The same newspaper that had that story about the fake story about the KFC chicken guy in my country, they published a story last year that was absolutely discredited weeks before they published it. It was on fact-checking websites as a complete hoax. And the story was this. It was supposedly about a Christian pastor in Africa who had said to his congregation, we must have the faith of Jesus and walk on water, and I'm going to prove to you that I'm a man of God, and I am going to walk on water, and he got eaten by crocodiles. Now, sounds hilarious, but also sounds extremely false straight away. But our top newspaper with the biggest circulation in this country published that story. They published it. And then it quietly disappeared off their website, I think about 2 days later. But that sort of shows you the state of the media, man. Nigel says, I had KFC in Edinburgh on holidays, tasted like fish, horrendous. We were in Japan for a family wedding a few years ago, and we had McDonald's there, and that was a very different tasting McDonald's than what it tastes like in New Zealand. And their sauces were different as well. They have a yummy sesame seed sauce over in Japan, and they had that at McDonald's. But yeah, you could taste the difference. Daniel says, I saw the owner of KFC many decades ago in Laramie, Wyoming store. Boy, he was cranky. Yeah, and that's why I don't believe they'd give away free chicken. It's hard enough. My local KFC always stuffs up our order, and, well, they went through a period of there's 5 or 6 drive-through orders in a row where they'd left out key components of the order, and I'd always have to drive back around, walk in, and say, we're missing this thing. And to prove to them that they'd actually stuffed up, man, it was like pulling teeth. Here's my birth certificate. Here's my receipt. Here's video footage of me at the drive-thru. Here's video footage from a dash cam proving that I haven't hidden a burger somewhere else in the car. And just to get them to do that. So I'm like, straight away I was suspicious that they'd be giving away free KFC, that's for sure. Yeah. There we go. Another Gen 100. When I asked, where was that line stolen from? Mojitos? I think I've heard something like that. I can't place it. You're right. It was mojitos. I'm a fiend for mojitos. Does everyone know it was It was in the remake of Miami Vice. Well, the Miami Vice movie, not the remake. The movie of Miami Vice. And is it Colin Farrell? Colin Firth? No, Colin Farrell. I always get too confused. He says, I'm a bit of a fiend for mojitos. Yeah, we did buy some tempura food and fried food in Japan. It was actually went to a restaurant too, sat around the low table. It was quite amazing. My brother-in-law is a PhD in robotics, my wife's brother, and he's married to a Japanese girl over there, and so the wedding was in Tokyo. So we went over a few years ago for that, took the kids. Pretty amazing experience, I'd have to say. Okay, and here comes the final news of the week, the story that you have all been waiting for. This is just absolute gold when I read this. Let me bring up the article. Cliffhanger is getting a female-led remake. No, I'm not joking. And no, the screen hasn't frozen. They are going to remake Cliffhanger, which is kind of weird enough, but they're going to make it a female-led remake. Doesn't that say everything? Like, let me read you from the article. The female-led reboot of the 1993 classic. I don't know if I'd call it a classic. That's maybe stretching it a bit. It certainly was I went to see it at the movies, but I don't know if maybe it's a classic. A guilty pleasure, shall we say. The 1993 classic will be directed by Anna Lily Amarpour, the cinematic mastermind. Again, I think that might be stretching it. Behind visionary films such as A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night and The Bad Batch, neither of which were, I think, particularly stunning examples of cinematic mastermind wizardry, but anyway. And based on a script by Sasha Penn, who wrote Creed 2. Creed 2 was all right. Casting is currently underway for a female lead to headline an ensemble cast with Jason Momoa in talks for a cameo. So I'm guessing that Jason Momoa is going to be the girlfriend or the boyfriend in the original film who dies at the beginning. Remember, it becomes the motivation. I don't know how they're going to do this. This thing is going to be absurd because so much of Cliffhanger was really about Stallone in many ways and the muscular prowess that he brought to that film. And I just, why? Why is it necessary? I don't think it is necessary. And what a weird choice of director too, because a remake of Cliffhanger is going to be a guilty pleasure popcorn movie. That's all it's going to be. So why would you get an indie director who's done these sort of art house indie films? It's kind of strange to me that you get someone like that. It's like the wrong sensibility to be making that film. But yeah, they're going to remake it, and they're going to remake it female. Now, to me, it's absurd because Cliffhanger, there's no way Cliffhanger warrants a remake. But what this shows you, I think, to me, is that the only way you could make this film work was to actually trade in off the back of an existing intellectual property. Someone says Amy Schumer as the Cliffhanger. Wouldn't that be glorious? They should just go full bizarre with it, turn it into a comedy. Seriously, if you're going to do it and destroy something like this, why not just go the whole hog and completely remake it as something totally different? Cliffhanger the musical. But starring overweight Russell Crowe. But the thing about this is interesting is if you made a version of Cliffhanger, but you didn't call it Cliffhanger, so you took that same sort of story concept about mountain climbers and bad guys trying to get to money and all the rest of it, and you just made a version of that today. You didn't call it Cliffhanger. You didn't associate it with the existing Cliffhanger property, the original film. Would it sell? And if you put a female in the lead, would it sell? I think it would be a hard sell even if you had a male in the lead, because this is just not a particularly exciting or interesting concept. It really isn't. So what do? You take the existing property and you trade in on the back of it. And what you do is you say, okay, well, let's steal this existing brand name and we'll just slap it over the top of whatever schlock we're gonna put out now. It's just, I can't believe they're even remaking it. Seriously, I can't believe they're even remaking it. But that scene with with Stallone holding up. Is he holding up the girl at one stage from memory? Desperately holding onto her with his, Stallone, peak bimming muscular physique, barely holding on. He can't do it. Like, I don't know how they're going to pull this off with a female lead. I just don't think. Toasty says, I don't know what Cliffhanger is. Well, Toasty, you're in for a treat. You should get yourself a copy of Cliffhanger. It's probably available in the 50-cent rental category. If they don't have one of those on iTunes, they should make one just for this film. With Stallone, it is a bit of a classic guilty pleasure, but it's not much more than that. John Lithgow was... what? Cal said it might be something like this. This is the end. You have to hold my weight, all of it. But can you imagine it? You've got a female actress trying to hold on to, I don't know, Jason Momoa. It's clearly not going to work, is it? There won't be a Mike Poppins film for sure. But yeah, John Lithgow as the villain was great. John Lithgow just threw himself into his villainy in that film. The best Cliffhanger remake is the first 5 minutes of Ace Ventura 2. How long before we get the Godmother parts 1, 2, and 3? Old Hollywood mob bosses have lost their marbles. Darth Shady, oh wow, I'm catching you live. Just jumped in. Hi Darth, how are you? Thank you, Darth Shady, too, for sending me the book. Just give me a second, guys. First rule of live streaming: never walk away from the camera. So yeah, we're all professional here, but Darth Shady sent me a book that she has written to read, and so I've got the book has arrived, and I'm really looking forward to starting this. My wife and I are actually going on. I've got to go and MC a wedding in Australia this weekend, so we're going to go and we're going to take a little break, couple of days break for our 15th wedding anniversary. I'm going to try and get some reading done. Yes, thank you, Darth Shady. Great to have you on board too. Folks, I'm hoping to bring you a review of this book and let you know all about it. Cliffhanger is on YouTube Movies for $3.99 US. Who is going to be the new Stallone? Well, it's going to be a female. That's the thing. They are remaking Cliffhanger with a female in the lead. So Daniel says, hello, Brendan. Hi, Daniel. How are you? So there you go, folks. I was hanging on the side of a mountain, but Stallone wasn't there to save me. So along came Anne Hathaway. She's the new Cliffhanger now. So yeah, that'll be the theme song too. I've just written it for you right there. Doesn't get any better than that, does it? Cliffhanger, the female lead version of Cliffhanger. But it's to me, the thing is, you wouldn't remake this movie, or you shouldn't, full stop. But how can you remake it with a female? When you come to Australia, maybe you can vote in our federal election. How the heck can you remake it with a female? Just absolutely bizarre. Anyway, that is me. I think that's all I want to talk about this week. Next week, I'm going to talk about. I want to talk about a couple of things next week, and I won't spoil it for you. I'll tell you what's coming up next week. Let's open the live stream for a bit of chat. Anybody want to ask anything, say anything? Cal said, "Here's my take. She won't even make it across the rope to him, and he will just fall to his death before she even gets an earshot." Yeah, it might be one of those kind of things where she feels the guilt of it rather than, because you can't do the physical prowess thing. It's not well. Maybe they can. I don't know. Who knows? But the thing doesn't seem good to me. Darth says most remakes are not that great. Yep, there are some exceptions that prove the rule, but you're right. The general norm is, especially a movie like this. I mean, I suppose that's the one thing about this. Cliffhanger was not cinematic mastery to start with. So if you're going to remake Cliffhanger, like remake a movie, this would be a movie to remake. Because you can only really probably go up, can't you? But the way they've announced it, though, we're going to have a female lead instead of Stallone, and we're going to have a director who does indie art house stuff on a film like this. It does look like it's destined to failure right from the very beginning. I've just had a whole lot of people who suddenly jumped in. I'm guessing that maybe is the fandom menace coming to an end. I was like, let's see what else is happening on the interwebs tonight. From the White Queen to the Cliffhanger. Will you make a vid on why The Dark Knight is so good? I'm actually thinking about making a vid about The Dark Knight Rises, believe it or not. I've got a particular idea about some of the religious thematic iconography in that film. It's actually quite fascinating when you look at that film. And I'm kind of not surprised because Nolan, for those who don't know, Nolan was educated at a Catholic high school, a Jesuit Catholic high school in the UK, I think. But he was Catholic educated. And so I'm not surprised that there's sort of religious iconography in there and in the sort of the thematic symbolism of the film. But also, interestingly, the Dark Knight itself, Batman itself, has that whole, it always had that sort of, what would you call it? There's a sort of Catholicity to it all. So, yeah, it's interesting. So I'm making a video on that. They could get Rian Johnson to direct the new Cliffhanger. Wouldn't that be fascinating? It would subvert your expectations. And it would subvert your expectations because it's not actually set on a cliff. It's on a big open plain. And there's no mountain climbing. They're runners instead. So there you go. Expectations subverted. This stuff writes itself. Ronda Rousey, that's exactly who I was thinking about before, and I couldn't remember her name. Ronda Rousey maybe could play the role, but I think you need a good actor. Mike Keogh says, it's Cliffhanger from the perspective of his girlfriend. The movie ends when she falls in the opening scene of the original. Shortest movie I ever went to. Daniel says to me, you need to talk about the Dollars trilogy on the channel one day, Brendan. Yeah, okay, I will do that. Nigel says maybe a female lead in Christine might work, maybe. Average Guy says it'll go straight to DVD. I'd agree. Geek by Day says KK is involved with The Mandalorian. That's true, but I'm still kind of hopeful. I am still hopeful because of the other two guys that are involved. Sorry, I'm getting all these messages pinging in from other places. Davis Lyons says, before I forget, and since I have you live, I just wanted to say thanks for your reviews and commentary on the Star Wars The Last Jedi. That is how I came to your channel and became a subscriber. Davis, that's very kind of you to say, and a lot of people say that to me. They say, I came here for the movie reviews, and I discovered other stuff on your channel that I really liked. And thank you, that's very encouraging, and I appreciate that support. You know, subscribers to YouTube are a fluctuating thing. They sort of come and go. That's fine. People have trends and fads that they go through. Totally get that. But I think I'm pretty blessed here to have a good bunch of fans, and there's some good engagement here and some intelligent people too. I've got a couple of Star Wars vids, pre-recorded Star Wars videos coming up actually. Yeah, there's one in particular. I think I'll do that one first actually. But yeah, I think that people will enjoy. So and no, it's not simply about The Last Jedi for those who are wondering. And in fact, the other one's not about The Last Jedi either. Cliffhanger underwater, says Cow. The 14th Warrior will be a female in a new sequel. Yeah. Yeah, man. Classic. Cliffhanger directed by Rian Johnson with Daisy Ridley and Jason Momoa. They've put Jason Momoa in there to make money, right? It's hey everyone, he's the sort of hot property of the moment. Who's the muscle man of the moment? Because I'm guessing they couldn't afford to get Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who by the way would have been a more obvious fit for the lead role if you were going to remake that movie. But anyway, is it just me, or is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson like the new Stallone and Schwarzenegger all rolled into one? I think he's sort of like, it's like muscular action movie guy from the 80s has finally hit peak sort of pinnacle muscular action movie guy, where, you know, previously you like Stallone could act, Schwarzenegger had more of the muscles and the tough guy but couldn't act, and now we've sort of finally got this peak sort of action superhero guy who's muscular, who can act well, and who does comedy too. It's got to sell at the box office. You're right, Darth, that's it. It's all about making that bullion. Alrighty, folks, I think that's me. You've been awesome. Apologies for the disruption to the stream. For those who've just joined and you want to go back and watch, there's actually two streams. because the first stream just broke down. I think I offended the lords of YouTube with something I said. We were actually talking about Alyssa Milano, and it just suddenly stopped. So if you want to go back and watch it, they'll be uploaded as 2 separate videos. So apologies for that. So I'll make sure I put a link though in the bottom of. Oh, thanks, Travis. My wedding anniversary today. 15 years ago today, I got married to my lovely wife, and 15 years ago today, the best 15 years of my life began. So thank you for that, Travis. And so what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description of both bits of the live stream, so you can watch both parts. Apologies for the technical fault though. Thank you, Darth. So that's me. As per usual, if you like the channel and you want to see more of it, please consider making a financial contribution. The links for how you can do that are in the video description below. Thank you to everyone who's already doing that. You guys are awesome. Generosity is overwhelming, and I'm doing my best to keep putting out content that you find interesting, entertaining, and engaging. And I'd like to see develop a little bit more of a community here too through the live streams, so hopefully we can do that. Thank you for everyone who tuned into the Forge, the very first Forge live stream for men about masculinity on Monday. That'll happen once a month going forward, and this live stream here once a week. So there'll be a weekly live stream just sort of rounding up the news and talking about stuff, and people can jump in and say whatever they want to say. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you next time on Left